Good afternoon to those joining us on the East Coast, and good morning to those in other parts of the country, and maybe even good evening if you're joining us from overseas. My name is Kim Bodemer. I'm the director of Talmid of Hebrew College, your home for adult learning. Welcome to Grow, an initiative of Talmid of Hebrew College, which gives participants the opportunity to gather, reflect, observe, and wrestle with topics relevant to our lives today through a Jewish lens. Earlier this month, we had the chance to learn from Jan Darsa, who shared insights into the modern Zionist movement through the eyes of its inhabitants. Today, we're excited to learn with Hebrew College professor of Bible, Rav Rachel Adelman, who will present two modern Midrashic compositions, one by Nurit Hirschfeld Skupinski, a survivor of Kibbutz Nachal Oz, and the other by Leora Elion of Kibbutz Kfar Aza, in response to the Black Sabbath, October 7th. As God's breath hovered over the face of the deep in the beginning of the world, so the human spirit draws out the source of light and life through creative response to catastrophe. Rav Rachel Adelman joined the full-time faculty in 2012 and provides a dynamic, open approach to text study, drawing on a wide range of sources from Tanakh and classical Midrash to modern Israeli poetry. She holds an MA in Jewish Studies from Matan, Baltimore Hebrew University, and a Ph.D. in Hebrew literature with a specialty in Midrash from Hebrew University of Jerusalem and rabbinic ordination from Hebrew College. Rav Rachel has just finished her third book, Daughters in Danger, From the Hebrew Bible to Modern Midrash, forthcoming from Sheffield Academic Press. This session and her upcoming class reflect a new direction in her work as a rabbi, a teacher, and a scholar, and arises from her interest in responses to trauma in modern Israeli literatures. It emerges directly out of this recent book and the calamity of October 7th. And without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Rav Rachel.
Hi, everybody. It's really wonderful to see old faces, old friends, and new faces, and to welcome you to this Grow session. I have, as many of you, gone through a real transformation over the past year and a half since October 7th, and full of anguish. And it has not lessened, although I feel hope on the horizon in a way that I haven't felt in a very long time. So I want to dedicate this particular learning session that we're doing together to the hostages that will be imminently released. I'm going to just share pictures of them so we have them in mind. So the three hostages that will be released on Thursday, hopefully, are Arbel Yehud, Agam Berger, and Gadi Moses. So may they be released into freedom, and may the rest of the hostages be released soon. As long as there are hostages, all of us are kept captive some way. So this recent interest of mine in trauma, responding to trauma in Israeli literature, comes directly out of October 7th. And I'm looking for how we handle trauma, collective trauma, how we are able to stand with those who suffered inexorably from the attack of Hamas on October 7th, how we support Israel in this moment and deal with our own sense of threat against us existentially, and how we move from that trauma into a place of healing and hope. Recently, Rachel Corazine published a selection of poetry written in response to October 7th called Shiva, a play on the 7th, the Shvi'i Shel October, right, the 7th of October, and Shiva as the 7 days of mourning. And the first opening of the book is a poem by Tsur Guetta. Can everybody see that text on the source sheet? Can everybody see the screen? Great. We're also going to share, if you want a hard copy, we're also going to share the source as a text, right? This via chat, right? Kim and Terry are going to upload that to the chat. I want to start with this opening poem by Tsur Guetta. My teacher Michal once asked, "Who can tell me the meaning of the verse? The earth was welter and waste and darkness over the face of the abyss. Haaretz hayta tohu vevohu vechoshech al pnei tehom." That is the second verse of the Genesis narrative. All these years from then to this very day, that question has echoed within me. The teacher's eyes, as she was looking for a raised hand, echoed in me. That all-encompassing silence echoed in me. On October 7th, the ringing telephone echoed in the silent home of my teacher, Michal. "It's me," I said. "Here is the welter and waste. Here is the darkness. Here is the abyss." So the poet is reflecting on the terms, the three mysterious terms of what pre-existed the creation of the world, which was tohu, vavohu, vechoshech al pnei tehom, right? Welter and waste, chaos and disorder, darkness and abyss. Those terms, those three terms are mysterious, right? That's what pre-existed order and light and the creation of light. And it seems that they are also associated with loopholes in creation that allow chaos and darkness to emerge through history. And she's saying, the poet is saying, Tsur Guetta is saying, the sources of that darkness and that chaos, we saw that darkness and chaos on October 7th. That's when the loophole, the conduit to chaos opened on our world. And it certainly, there is a sense where that darkness and that chaos and that evil led to a kind of silence, right? A despair, ein milim. There are no words that we could use to speak of the atrocity that we observed over the distance that we experienced when we went to Shivas or heard the stories that were coming out. But on the other hand, and here's what I want to suggest, and really what I feel that we need to work towards. There's a second part of that verse in Genesis, and it's Ruach Elohim merachevet al panei hamayim, right? The spirit and wind, the spirit or wind, Ruach Elohim, the spirit or wind of God hovered over the face of the water. So I want to say that the antidote to that darkness, that abyss, the tohu vavohu, the chaos, that pre-existed the creation of light and order in the making of the word. That's what we're looking for today. We're looking for the Ruach Elohim that hovers, Spirit of God that hovers over the face of the abyss. And in fact, in response to October 7th, there was a great outpouring of creative energy. So many songs were written, laments, modern Midrash, that were modeled on classic forms like Echa, like Lamentations, the Book of Lamentations. Two of the works that we're going to be examining today were written in response to Tamar Biala's work. Adir Shuni, Tamar Biala, let me just find a copy of this. Okay. So nice to be in my study. I can pull the books off my shelf. So Tamar Biala is the editor of a collection of modern Midrashic compositions called Dirshuni, which means interpret me, right? Comment upon me, right? Respond to me. And it's a comment, it's a way of creating midrash in response to classic biblical texts or agadic works. And what Tamara Biala has been doing for the past 20 years is collecting modern feminist midrash in response to the Bible. So recently, and so these are the two volumes in Hebrew, Dirshuni, which means comment upon me or interpret me. She turned to some of the composers of modern midrash and asked them to compose a midrash in response to October 7th. And the two pieces that I want to present to you today are by Nurit Hirschfeld-Skupensky, who's a survivor of the slaughter of a kibbutz Nachal Oz. And her piece is inspired by Echa, okay? And it's a kind of lament in the spirit of Echa. Before I go into the text, is there anybody that has a question, a burning question about the motivation behind this or the attempt to address this? I just want to open it up for very briefly for your questions before we go into the text. Okay, should we go into it? Give me a thumbs up. Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to read just the first 3 lines of Echa of the Book of Lamentations, upon which Nurit's lament in response to October 7th was written. And you'll see there are a lot of echoes in her language in relationship to Echa. Now, Echa is the scroll, Lamentations is the scroll that is read traditionally on Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, which commemorates the destruction of the first and second temple in 586 BCE and in 70 CE. Now, Tisha B'Av is also generally associated with other disasters like the expulsion from Spain in 492, the Crusades, and I would like to add to the tragedies of Tisha B'Av, October 7th, even though the dates don't line up. I think that October 7th very much matches in scale the calamities of the Chorban, the destruction of the first and second temple. So Echa opens with these words, and I'll read them in English, but refer to the key word Echa that frames the the text. Echa, meaning how or alas. Lonely sits the city once great with people, right? Echa yashva badad ha'ir rabati am. She that was great among the nations is become like a widow. The princess among states is become a thrall, meaning an enslaved person. B'chol tivke balayla v'dimata alechya. Bitterly she weeps in the night, her cheeks wet with tears. Ein la menachem mikol ohaveha. There is none to comfort her. All her friends, all her allies have betrayed her. They have become her foes. Galta Yehuda me'oni umirov avuda. Judah has gone into exile because of misery and hard oppression. When she settled among the nations, she found no rest. Lo matzah manoach. All her pursuers overtook her in the narrow places. Ben hametzarim. Okay, so let's read the first poem, lament, really, by Nurit Hirschfried-Skupinski. So first, I want to preface this by saying I actually think that Echa should not be translated as alas. I think that is too weak. How is really a rhetorical question that it expresses dismay. How is this possible? And so I read it in the light of what I would say is the line from here. Let me just bring it in here. The line from King Lear. Howl, howl, howl. Oh, you are men of stones. This is King Lear upon the death of Cordelia. Had I your tongues and eyes, I'd use them so that heaven's vault should crack. Oh, she's gone forever. So I want to read how, Echa, as a howl, as a wordless howl and cry in response to calamity. So this is her opening. Echa, Echa, the word Echa opens 3 of the chapters in Lamentations. Echa yashva badad, just as Echa, the scroll of our Lamentations, opens with Echa, that same phrase, so too here. Howl, Echa, how lonely she sits, nir oz, sated with blood. Sterot is like a widow, a city smitten, and who was faithful to her? Howl, Echa, how lonely she sits. Echa yashva badad, in the safe room, that is the mamad, a family and another one and another one and another one. Howl, how, Echa, how lonely sits the city, the young women, lookouts, all eyes, yet no one listening, and salvation none. Howl, Echa, how lonely sits the city, how lonely they sit, young women and men in the hiding places of ditches and bushes. Their dancing ceased, yet who would release them? Howl, Echa, how lonely they sat, the captives, and they are still sitting, 120 men, elderly, and children. They cry profusely at night, tears on their cheeks, and there is none to comfort them. So there's much resonance between the language of Lamentations and this poet, but what I'm intrigued by in the poem is how the poet is using classical forms, including the echa phrase, the how is this possible phrase, and then mapping it onto a kind of reportage of the various sites of calamity that were struck on October 7th. So the first one is a depiction of the families huddled in their safe rooms in their mamad in each and every one of the kibbutzim around the Gaza envelope. The second depicts the tatzbataniot, right? Those women who were lookouts, who were not listened to when they warned that there was a planned onslaught of terrorists about to attack, right? No one listening, lo hayta hakshava, right? And then no salvation. The fifth stanza addresses the young women of the Nova Festival who were crouching in ditches and bushes and bomb shelters, and none came to their salvation. Hours and hours they crouched in unbearable heat. And then finally, of course, the hostages, the captives, the chatufim and chatufot. And of course, the 120 men and women are not 120 men and women anymore, right? Many more are thought to be dead now and hostage, and many released. Hopefully, more to be released. So my question at the end of this poem is what we do with the phrase, Ein Menachem, there is none to comfort them. How do we hear this lament and respond to it with compassion and with effectiveness? And what advantage does the classic form of the Echa language give us in responding to mourning, this act of mourning, this act of lament? We can open it up a little bit. How would people like to respond? What is your response to there is none to comfort them? Is this an invitation, and an invitation to what?
So we can ask people to unmute if they have something to say. I always have something to say. So I think it grounds, it really, the story or the horror of October 7th is grounded in Jewish tradition and Jewish text for us. How do we respond? We respond by looking at past tragedies and saying we survived and we moved on and we succeeded in continuing and having more children and learning more, etc.
Sort of with resilience. Yeah, a continued affirmation of life. Beautiful. Thank you. Elizabeth.
I'm just I'm feeling as though that it's impossible to respond effectively. And I have felt this way throughout all of this past year and a half. And so, however, what I'm thinking is how remarkable it is that this woman has written down so beautifully her lament. And it's our job to listen and witness. And we must do that. And by listening and witnessing, hopefully that will instruct us also looking at history as it has been done, but to honor them, to be able to hear it, which is so hard.
Beautiful. So really the first stage in in healing is to bear witness, to hear, to listen, right? So that phrase, Ein Menachem, there was no comforter, there was no Ein Hakshava, there was no one listening. But for us to be listeners, beautiful as a first stage. And any other comments? So I want to move on to the second source. And the second source is a little more complicated. Leora Elon of Kibbutz Kfar Aza tells an incredible story on YouTube. It's recorded in Hebrew, but I'll summarize. So she was in her mamad, her safe room, when they heard the rockets. And she went into her safe room with her granddaughters and her sons and daughters-in-law. And one of her sons went out with the home guard and ran around collecting weapons in order to fight off the hundreds of Hamas terrorists that invaded their kibbutz, Kfar Aza. And I think up to 70 people were slaughtered on that day from the kibbutz alone, and many more were taken hostage. They managed to fight off the terrorists as they were trying to break down the door and burn the house, and they managed to stay safe, and actually help rescue another family. And after the 36 hours of being closed up inside this room, the safe room, when they finally emerged, she found out that her son had been killed defending the kibbutz. So I think this poem emerges out of that terrible loss, but she also says something incredible in the interview. She said that had she not gone through that trauma, she would have never seen the strength that she saw in her granddaughter, who helped the soldiers when the idea finally came, locate where all of the homes of the hidden people, hidden families were, the survivors, who was, because she had the WhatsApp, she knew where everybody was, and she knew the kibbutz really well. And she saw her granddaughter running around with the IDF to help save those in their safe rooms. It's an incredible story. She said before October 7th, Kfar Aza was 95% Garden of Eden and 5% Gehinnom, and on hell. And on October 7th, that ratio switched. That for 5% of hell broke loose on October 7th. So this is the poem, and it's based on a passage from the Talmud in Masechet Sanhedrin, right? The Talmud Sanhedrin, and it's based on this mysterious verse in Echa, B'cho tivkei b'layla. Cry, you shall cry at night, right? Indeed, weep at night. And the question that the Talmud, the Agadah, the Midrash in the Talmud seems to ask is, one, why is it in the emphatic imperative form, b'cho tivkei, cry, right? Cry at night. And why at night? Why in the night? So the story goes like this. At night, for all who cry at night, one who hears their cries along with them. Cry, she will cry. B'chotivke. This is none other than a command. You will cry. Tivke. You must cry. One must cry in response to the sorrow of one's neighbor whose son or daughter has died, for thus one to oneself a little in their place. At night, so why at night? One must cry in response to the sorrow of one's neighbor whose son or daughter has died, for thus one takes away a little of their sorrow and places oneself a little in their place in compassion. At night, why at night? For in the daytime, their neighbors see their grief and may cry with them. At nighttime, people are left alone with their grief. And this is why it is written, cry, she will cry, in the emphatic form, that their neighbor cries with them at night. And as the weeping and sorrow are shared, so that sorrow is diminished a little in the world. Okay? Now, we go back to the Talmud. So that is Leora's version of the Midrash. But the Talmud tells a story. Okay, the Talmud tells a story of this act of crying at night and places it in the body, the mouth of a particular woman. And the listener happens to be a very famous rabbi, right? Rabban Gamliel. There was a woman who was Rabban Gamliel's neighbor, whose son died, and she would cry for him at night. Rabban Gamliel heard her voice and cried along with her until his eyelashes fell out. The next day, his students took note and removed her from his neighborhood. Now, I want to pause and suggest that the Talmud sees the crying woman at night and the consequence of the contagion of crying, that is Rabban Gamliel, crying in sympathy with her, as something that harms Rabban Gamliel, right? The pshat of the Agadah, the simple reading of the Agadah in the Talmud, is that somehow Rabban Gamliel should be spared this compassionate response to the woman crying at night in mourning for her son. So she gets removed from the neighborhood. Okay? Now, along comes Leora and asks the question, really? Maybe there's another way of understanding this removal of the woman who is bereaved of her son, right? So this is her radical reading. But Rabban Gamliel, who was crying in sympathy, was fulfilling what was written, cry, she will cry at night. That is, he was supposed to cry with her. So why did they remove her from his neighborhood? His students said, because his eyelashes fell out. And that was because he was crying alone. Now, the expression eyelashes fell out must be surprising to you. Is that right? It's a little weird. It's actually an extreme response to mourning. It's also attributed, by the way, to Leah, who had weak eyes. Her eyes were weak because she cried and cried and cried and cried to the point where her eyelashes fell out. So it's an expression of extreme remorse, extreme mourning. Okay. So, but they say it's not that he was losing sleep and they wanted to spare him from losing sleep, but this is Nurit's invention, but that he was crying alone. The problem was that he was alone and there were not others who were crying with him, who were also responding in compassion. His neighbors didn't hear him crying and didn't cry along with him for the one who lost her child. That's why we removed her from the neighborhood. Because that woman, in their eyes, was like Abraham, our father, of whom it is said. And then she brings in another brilliant move, brings in another midrash about Abraham. And that midrash is an image of a flat Abraham, when he was given the command, Lechacha, go forth from your homeland, from your kin, from your father's house, Lechacha mi'artzecha mi'moltecha mi'beit avicha, el haaretz asher arecha, to the land I will show you. That command, Lech Lecha, is likened to Abraham at the moment. He is like a flask of balsam oil, sealed shut by a tight cord and laid aside in a corner whose scent does not carry. But when it is stirred, its scent diffuses. Thus, the Holy One, blessed be he, said to Abraham, our father, move yourself, stir yourself from place to place, and your name will grow great in the world. Go forth, lech lecha, from your land and from your birthplace and from your father's house. So the students sought to remove the bereaved woman, right? That woman who is crying for the death of her, because of the death of her son. They sought to remove her from the neighborhood so that she would stir about in the world, going from one neighborhood to another, crying for her son, and her voice would be like a shofar, sounding from one end of the earth to another, calling out, cry, you will cry in the night, B'cho tivkei, for you are the community of Israel. You're Knesset Yisrael, together the unity of all of Israel. And so Rabban Gamliel won't cry alone for her in the night, but the people of his community and all communities will cry along with them. And the sorrow will diminish a little in the world. And since she stirred about in the neighborhood, the people cried along with her, and their tears purified their souls. So her mind eased a little, and she found some respite for her soul. I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to suggest, I'm going to ask the question, what is the radical move that Leora Elon is suggesting about how the voice of this crying, mourning woman can create unity for Israel? How can we respond to her cry? Right? And how is that a source of unity for us, Knesset Yisrael? I'll ask you that question. What's her, right? What's her effect? Right? Hearing her words and her crying, what's her effect on us? And then how we in turn collectively can respond to her. Vivian.
I find this really difficult because I struggle to get past the fact that as the first poem alluded to, apart from the vast percentage of the Jewish world, there's been a significant part of the world who is in fact not crying with us, but is applauding. And I thought I'd put some of that to bed, but all these two poems has just brought my anger back again.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I'm still stuck back there.
Yeah. Yeah. Meaning that resistance to hearing is also there, right? That there are others that are not crying with Rabban Gamliel and not willing to listen to her tears. Yeah, I can hear that too, Vivian. Yeah. Anybody else have a response? Yeah, Elizabeth.
I am really drawn to the fact that she's offering in this description, in this rewriting, that getting out and being not afraid to show the grief is really a potential for healing for not only herself, but also for the community. That also the idea that she not be hiding her grief, that her grief is not a shame that she should bear alone.
Beautiful.
That in fact, it is an offering that might purify souls around her. I just think that is gorgeous. I'm not sure whether, yes. And since she stirred about in their neighborhoods, and the people cried along with her, and their tears purified their souls. What a wonderful, amazing offering, perhaps to the community of Israel. And would it be so wonderful for the rest of the world?
Yeah, 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 yeah. And yeah, the image of the tears as a source of purification. Yeah. And I think what's interesting, her response is that she found her mind was eased in response to that. She found respite for her soul, right? Manoach lenafsha. If you remember, the first lines was she did not have respite, right? Ein, right? In Echa, she has no manoach, lo matzah manoach. But when people weep with her and console her and are empathetic with her, there is, right, the sorrows lessened a little bit in the world. Beautiful. Linda.
Hi, I'm sorry I'm late. I came in late, I regret, but I wanted to respond to Vivian, and I would say I give a second to what you were saying, and also to Elizabeth, because I think in a way to get out into the world, to give one's own personal experience of this last event, this horror, is to really open up the possibility to let others recognize that maybe they've had a very distorted understanding of what happened on in Gaza and in October 7th. And that's about all I can say. The weeping alone is just weeping alone. And so it's not really sharing and giving others the opportunity for their own grief.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Nice, Linda. So I hear you responding to Vivian's anger, right? With the frustration that there were people who were not willing to listen. And we have to mitigate that. Yeah.
It's our job, essentially.
Yeah, it's
Nobody's going to do it for us.
what our job is. And it's why we talk about it, and we need to teach it, and we need to share these sources. Absolutely. Yeah. Any other responses? So I want to I've been doing a lot of reading about trauma as I'm developing this course. And I want to share a few words from Judith Herman, who talks about the stages of responding to trauma. The fundamental stages of recovery are establishing safety, reconstructing the trauma story, and restoring the connection between survivors and their community. So that process, and I don't think they're one after the other. I think those three stages overlap to a great extent. Establishing safety means being able to hear their stories. And restoring connection to the community also is about hearing them in sympathy, and telling their stories and acknowledging their pain. And of course, there's that this could never happen again. We should never ever let this happen again. Yeah, but I feel that our job is to tell their stories and to hold their stories up and to weep with them, and in that way to diminish their sorrow a little in the world. To that end, I want to mention that I am teaching a course through Hebrew College Adult Education Program. I think it's between around Passover and Memorial Day. Terry will talk about it. And I'm also teaching a course for the rabbinical school that is at Hebrew College on Thursday afternoons, and it's open to auditors if people are interested. It's a 12-week session. It's responding to trauma in modern Israeli literature, and it includes poems from Shiva. It includes Yehuda Amichai. It includes Amos Oz, and my favorite novelist, David Grossman. And we'll read selections, poetry, prose, memoir. But it's all in the sense of putting this literature in historical perspective. I'm going to turn it over to Terry and Kay.
Thank you. So, Rachel, thank you so much for teaching us this morning, this afternoon. We're all struggling with our own way of dealing with, the trauma that's going on, and as much as I think a lot of the families and the whole state of Israel feels that they're alone, that the Jewish community of the world is following and is watching and is empathizing and feeling the same issues. When you put up the picture of the people that were going to be released, God willing, this Thursday, and then somebody wrote, I thought there was one more, and somebody else, said, so we are watching and we're following along, and in the hopes that my comment has been, when do you can't celebrate, so how do you react to the fact that 7 people have been freed so far? I still go every Sunday we walk around Lexington Center with Israelis and Americans carrying flags and the faces of those who have not been released. I know it's done in Newton and other places. And this will continue. And Shiva, I think, gave people, and the poetry that you shared with us gave us a chance to, or the people who are experiencing this firsthand, a chance to reflect a little bit and gain some kind of solace. So Kim's going to tell us about the Rachel's courses and other things coming up, the next Grow session. I'm going to hand it over to her, but thank you again, everyone, for being with us.
Great. Thank you, Terry.
You.
Um,
Great to see you, Barry, and other people, Carol and Viv and Elizabeth. And Lillian. Familiar
Um,
face. So nice.
So thank you everyone for joining us today. Rav Rachel, amazing. Thank you so much for that difficult, but also maybe some seeds of hope in that teaching. And as Rav Rachel mentioned, she's offering this Tamid course. This has also been in person in partnership with Congregation Oratid in Wayland. So if you're local, we invite you to register for that. The course begins in early April, and you'll be able to find additional information and register by clicking the link that Terry is going to put in the chat, I'm pretty sure. And we have a lot of other courses coming up in February and March, and some even later this spring. So I encourage you to check out our full catalog of courses that you'll be able to find something that interests you. I want you to mark your calendars. Our next growth session is happening at the end of February, February 26th, and it's related to today's session. So we are very fortunate to have the opportunity to learn from Michael Bonin, one of the editors and translators of Shiva, Poems of October 7th. The anthology includes 59 poems printed alongside their English translations and really gave voice to choked tears, rage, despair, and following the horrors of October 7th. So the registration link should also be in the chat. And as you get your follow-up from today's session, we will include all this information as well. So with gratitude for your presence today, to our presenter, and keeping the hostages in our hearts. And I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day as we continue on this journey.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
I
So
can
much.
stay on a little bit if
Thank you.
anybody wants to ask any questions. I'm here.